Hey, this is Josh with Analog Reviews, and joining me today is Nathan, Val,
What's up?
and Trent.
What's up, Internet?
And we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. Due to the fact that we played through Gears of War Judgment with 4 people, we're going to be doing a 4-man review. First, I want to get it out in front that despite what a lot of sources have said about this game, this is probably the worst Gears of War game. And we're going to discuss why, and we're going to talk about its strengths and its weaknesses. First, I guess we'll talk about the cooperative campaign that we played together.
Basically, the game starts from a story standpoint toward the end of the events that are in the game. You start out in a courtroom, and your 4 characters are telling their rendition of the events that led to your arrest and court-martial. Basically, the game's structure is you start a mission. It's an arena-style event. Oftentimes, you're tasked with guarding something or setting up a defensive position, or progressing from point A to point B within like a small arena type setting. And then at the end of each arena setting, your team is scored based upon headshot, gib kills, perfect active reloads, etc.
Yeah, I'm pretty much what Trent said. The game pretty much has no feeling of pacing. Just feels like the horde mode over and over and over again. You just move from room to room, dispatching like 60 enemies. You're given a score screen at the end, and it's just the same thing over and over again. The areas, there's not much variety between them. They all look somewhat similar to one another. Yeah, it just feels like multiple stages of horde mode and not a true campaign.
That's probably one of the biggest problems with the game in general.
The way it's designed kind of prevents it from being more than what the other Gears of War games were. The arena style design that they set up didn't allow you to like look at the environment. You know, when you guys were like playing and all this stuff, a lot of the times I would stop and look at the environments, and you know, they had good looking stuff, but you just never looked at it. You were constantly moving from one end of the building to the next without any pace.
Well, you kill everything in a room. Instead of having maybe 5 or 6 enemies, every time you go into a room, there's about 60 enemies. The spawning seemed to be, despite the smart spawning system being implemented, it seemed worse. Sometimes we'd have like holes appear, E-holes appear right in the middle of our group and things like that, kind of messing up a front in a cover-based game. It did keep you away from staying in cover more, which I guess might be an improvement, depending on how you look at it. You would go in a room, kill 60 people, or whatever it was. You'd be graded on that. You'd open a door, you'd finish that part of the chapter, and you go into the next room, repeat over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until the game is done, and it's just like playing one horde mode after another. It really didn't come together as a campaign at all for me, and just felt like almost like an arcade download minigame type game to play.
It didn't help that the narrative itself was complete and utter garbage. I mean, basically the game starts, you're arrested, and you're not really told what the charges are, and then story time begins, and it's just each one of your characters giving some banal sequence of events that led up to the very moment that you're in the courtroom, and it's just utterly ridiculous. The world is like going to hell, and these people are spending time sitting around a courtroom, exchanging war stories, and arguing over whether they're guilty of some charge that you're not really even aware of or not. I mean, it's just utterly absurd.
Yeah, the first 3 chapters don't even touch why they're in trouble anyways. It's really like the 4th chapter that finally reveals why they're in trouble.
It's just a poor excuse, basically, to pad the game.
I don't know. There might be some more details in the story I missed, but it was so uninteresting and boring in the fact that there was a bug in my game that kept cutting out the audio of the cutscenes that didn't help. That I wasn't really paying attention to. It couldn't grab my interest.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they probably should have just released Gears of War Judgment as like an expansion pack to Gears of War 3, just DLC, and not a full $60 standalone game. Because all it is just a series of horde modes that just feels like a bunch of mini games and not like a true campaign or anything like that. The story is abysmal. There's no feeling of progression. It's just room after room fighting monsters. You don't go to any interesting locations or anything. It's all pretty much the same. I think
there's a few spots that are okay.
Not really.
The problem is it's not so much the art direction is lacking. It's because these are all just arenas. The environment doesn't really feel alive in any meaningful way. It's just kind of set dressing, you know, for the combat.
Yeah, it's got one entrance, one exit. You know, you just build your way, walk over towards it, and
there's just a bunch of chest-high walls in between, you know, the entrance door and the exit door.
Well, the one level I wanted to point out was when we arrived at that one city where we crossed over the bridge. I like that area.
The other kind of interesting wrinkle that they added, which in my opinion kind of faltered, was the idea of declassified missions. Basically, these are modifiers to these arena-style events. They're supposed to make the game more difficult. In most cases, they seem to make the game more tedious. Often, if you choose to do all 42 of these declassified missions, they're rather repetitive. Basically, a lot of times, you have visual impediments, such as smoke or fog or sand or whatever. Some basically stick you with specific weapons, like Boltox and the boom shields. Some of them basically limit your ammo, etc., etc. And these were just kind of massively annoying after a while.
Well, the declassified missions, yeah, I mean, as far as the difference between difficult and tedious, that's something that games in general don't know how to understand. Just slowing down your progression through the game and making it so you have to take cover more. That's kind of something that happens with difficulty in games where your health regenerates. You don't really need to be any better or play any better or be able to shoot any better. You just have to occasionally take cover more frequently than you would on the easier difficulties. On that note, we played through on like the hardcore mode, since we couldn't play on the insane mode until we'd beaten the game, and it was still, not too challenging.
Yeah, all the enemies are pretty much just, the enemies from the other Gears games. I think they've only introduced one new enemy in this installment, and it all gets really repetitive very fast. I think you encounter like pretty much every enemy in the game within the first hour, save for like one.
There are a few that are introduced late game, but yeah, it's the variety isn't exactly spectacular. Even the aforementioned new enemy isn't really all that interesting. Basically, he's like a regular grunt with a rifle who, as soon as you pump a few rounds into him, he gets pissed off and mutates into some spiky red rageaholic. Pro tip: just use the chainsaw on that guy before he turns, and you won't have to deal with him.
Yeah, it makes it a bit easier. And I just felt there wasn't any strategy. We were never coordinating anything online. We just kind of all sat behind things and we were talking about unrelated things for the most part. And a good cooperative game, you have to cooperate with each other pertaining to what you're actually doing. And we just found ourselves just shooting at whichever enemy was closest or whichever was the biggest threat, and we all kind of did what we were supposed to do. Very rarely does the game force you to actually split up or do anything creative with a cooperative, guard somebody. It only does that once, and that's in the Aftermath campaign. So you're just running around as 4 people all the time together, clearing out one room after another without any real changes in objectives.
It doesn't help that there's no name tags over anyone's head, so you have no idea who's who, and every time we would like reload a checkpoint, it would swap our characters around. Like one time, Josh would be Cole, and then he'd be Baird, and we wouldn't know who was who, and you couldn't like coordinate as easily. You couldn't just like call out for specific people to help you.
Majority of the time, having teammates was almost more of a hindrance. You're always having teammates block shots, block paths. You can't roll backwards or something to get away from a ticker because there's teammates standing behind you. And because the character models are so fat,
Yeah, that was also irritating.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than like finally lining up a nice headshot on someone with a long shot, and then like your teammates just trying to like roll out of the way from something else that's trying to kill them, and you miss your opportunity to take your shot.
The game frequently bottlenecks all the action, so that happens quite a bit. And as far as like the good things about the campaign, I mean, the good things are the things that were good about the other Gears of War games. The perfect reload system, metagame. Perfect active reload system metagame has always been a strength of Gears and something that you don't see in any other games. Cover system's competent enough, although the fact that having one button do everything is still pretty clunky, and sometimes you'll stick to a wall when you don't want to, or not be able to take cover. You'll be rolling into a wall if someone's already there. It's the same problem that's been in all the other Gear games, but roadie running's fun, decent looking game.
Yeah, I will say that the arena-style setup of the main campaign at least makes it so it's the only game on the Unreal Engine I can think of that doesn't suffer from massive texture pop-in issues.
Yeah, that is improvement. Every other Gears game, you'd always have to wait for textures to load in, but since they got a loading screen between pretty much every room you go to, that isn't a problem anymore.
See, I'd rather have texture pop-in and a feeling of pacing than no texture pop-in and no feeling of pacing, where you're interrupted with like a score screen in between every like chat.
all the momentum in the game is just broken every time you finish a skirmish and you go to your next checkpoint, and then you get a loading screen.
It never seemed like we wanted to continue on the campaign.
The campaign just, I mean, it was pretty mutual feeling between the four of us. I mean, the last few chapters kind of felt like a grind for us. We were just finishing the game because we knew I had to do a review for it. I enjoyed Gears of War 3. I liked Gears of War 2 and Gears of War 1, but Gears of War 3 was my favorite as far as the campaign goes. I didn't really enjoy this game after the first chapter. Once the Aftermath campaign started, it was a little refreshing, more like the older games, had some pacing, and I enjoyed that at the beginning, but that started getting old as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like a 2-hour campaign, so I mean, it's kind of bad when you can't even pace a 2-hour stretch of events.
Pretty much most of the campaign, you're just fighting those Lambda zombie guys that just run at you and you just shoot them. Like, that was the most dominant enemy for a few chapters. Yeah, and the fact that when you just kill them, they evaporate is always kind of annoying in games for me.
They don't even like fall over, they just evaporate. It just looks so Flash game-like.
Well, there's something about like the original Gears and, where pretty much all the enemies came out of the E-hole, the emergence hole. There's something about that where it created a layer of strategy. If you want the enemies to stop spawning, you have to figure out a way to destroy the emergence hole. But that really wasn't pertinent at all in this one. There would occasionally be an E-hole, you blow it up, but enemies could just spawn anywhere out of the ground. I saw enemies on a number of occasions spawn like out of thin air. Just like
shoot up from the ground.
Yeah, you get the ones that shoot up from the ground, which they're supposed to, but I even saw enemies just like spawn, like they were just right in front of us.
There was the times where you get like 4 grinders spawn like right behind each other, and it was stupid.
Oh, the smart spawn system was just stupid because sometimes on the segments where you're timed, sometimes you'd get a bunch of enemies that take a long time to kill, and you wouldn't be able to kill everything before the timer, and then the next time we'd finish like a minute and a half left because we just got an easier spawn.
Well, on top of that too, I noticed in the late game section we had that time section where basically we would move faster than the spawn system seemed to be operating. So then we had enemies spawning behind us, and not just like regular grunts. I'm talking about like the mulchers or the guys with the boom shields and the maces who are really annoying. They just basically, you wouldn't even see them. They'd come up from behind and just take you out. It just created a really irritating game experience.
Yeah, in my opinion, the game would be a lot more fun if you didn't even use the declassified system for all those extra missions. They're not really extra missions, they're just like extra modifiers, but it's more fun if you don't do that, but it encourages you to do that because there's several achievements linked to it. But if you just played through the game normally and didn't use any of the declassified things, it would probably be even more enjoyable.
I will say there were a couple,
and it's kind of like filling for the backstory as well. They always say like a line or two about the circumstance they were in when they do it.
This one time I fought 47 locusts.
And declassified, I did it blind.
No, it was 50. I remember.
I will say the one thing about the declassified missions I did like some of the weapon modifiers, because let's be honest, I'm playing a Gears game. 90% of the time I'm using a Lancer, and then a shotgun for a sidearm because I know I'll be able to find ammo for those weapons. But being forced to use the bolt hawks or some of the sniper rifles, things like that, that I did enjoy. It was a change of pace for me at least.
I felt that the declassified missions definitely helped strengthen the game, personally. I mean, we played through it declassified. Imagine how boring and mundane the game would have been if every single mission was easy and there was nothing different and never forced you to do anything. I mean, the game is already boring enough, but if we just had to clear through waves with our Lancers every time with no obstacles and easy enemies, it would have been quicker, which would have been good in this case, but I think the game would have been a lot more boring.
Some of the declassified missions were alright, where you use different weapons and whatnot that you're not used to using. But the majority of the declassified missions were just kill X amount of enemies, get to this spot before the timer runs out, or you die. And like you said, the smart spawn system could make that a lot more difficult depending on what spawns. And it was just really repetitive because you'd rush through a cover-based game and you'd have the enemies spawn behind you and whatnot. And the other one that was really frequent was the fact that you'd have your visibility hindered, so you couldn't see a few feet in front of you, and it just made the game look like shit for that entire time.
I didn't mind those visibility ones. Like I said, without that, there would have been no variance of gameplay. Yeah, it would just be so boring and monotonous. Like every other Gears game, there's like a driving level, there's a level where you stay out of the dark or whatever, you get one shot, you know. They have mechanics in the games that make it like interesting and change the gameplay up a bit, but this one had absolutely nothing like that. There's levels where you go forward and just make it from point A to point B and kill every monster, and then there's a level that's a poor version of the Horde mode from Gears of War 3, which they completely removed from this game for some reason, where you just put a couple defenses up and hold a point for 5 minutes more or less.
Yeah,
and the entire game was just the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, let's talk about the multiplayer, because, you know, back to a point that Nathan made earlier about the fact that this really should have been DLC or whatever. They excised certain modes from Gears of War 3, namely Horde mode, and on top of that, they only offer like 4 new maps for both Versus and the new Overrun mode that they've added to the game.
4 for each, yeah. So a total of 8 maps. The Overrun mode is like Beast mode more or less, but I think it's not as good. You know, the class system and everything for the humans, but there's less beasts than there were in the third game. Like you can't be a berserker or anything crazy like that. They took out like some of the heavy monsters. I don't know, from the levels we played, they didn't seem as good either.
No, the levels really are they're pretty hollow. Since the way the game works is basically the humans have to protect. There are 3 E-holes, or no, 2 E-holes on the map, and then 1 generator at the very end. So basically, the humans are tasked with guarding those. And the problem is you're confined to a very, very small area for each one of those sections. The levels just don't feel really different from one another. Nothing about the levels or their designs really will give you a preference from one level to another. It's all just aesthetic.
Yeah, breaking the levels up into 3 different areas definitely hurt it. Because you're just playing 3 tiny maps instead, and there's like 2 ways to get to the E-hole or 2 ways to do this, and you just guard them.
It never allows you to find your own hold-up space, like in a previous Horde mode.
Yeah, it doesn't switch around and stuff, and you have to kind of figure it out.
My favorite aspect of the multiplayer from the other Gears games is sadly the perfect active reload system. I always just enjoy reloading the guns and timing it perfectly. I know it's kind of silly, but I really enjoy that system, and they removed that from the Gears of War Judgement multiplayer. You can still get like the gray reloads where you just reload faster, but you don't get the damage boost. There's no like hitting that white line anymore.
That's a huge decrease in the skill cap of the game, and it's another aspect of just casualizing the game. That and that they removed down but not out from the multiplayer. They pretty much removed the 2 things from Gears of War multiplayer that make it different from games like Call of Duty and other games. I was never a huge fan of the Gears of War multiplayer. I played it a bit, and down but not out does create an aspect of strategy that the game has and forces you to play together as a group, so that if you go down, you have a teammate there to res you. That's completely removed now. You get shot, you die. So they definitely made the multiplayer a lot more casual, taking out the reload system, which enhances your damage if you are good at that timing aspect, and not forcing you to play as a group as much, other than the benefit of having more people shooting at the same target. I think any multiplayer system that takes away strategy and makes it more mindless is a step in the wrong direction.
And another thing, I don't understand why they took away Horde mode when Gears was the one that kind of introduced that whole thing.
Why they took it away, but they put it in the single player so prevalently, and a dumbed down, stripped down version of it. Horde mode was like my favorite thing to do on Gears 3, where you set up the base and, you know, occasionally you'd have like the boss enemies and stuff come too.
Yeah, I mean, it's really Gears of War Light. It's really just kind of embarrassing, actually. Because, yeah, I mean, also a point about Overrun mode is all the defenses that are set up are set up automatically, and your job as a human is only to maintain them. You don't get the opportunity to build new defensives. Unless you're an engineer, you can throw down a single turret, which is not very fulfilling. There's no money system like the Gears of War 3 Horde mode. And then again, you know, being confined to a very tight space in the maps, it just really, really dumbs down the whole experience.
But they do have survival mode, which is Horde mode,
which isn't way.
Yeah.
Survival's even worse than that because I mean it's only like 10 waves.
Forgettable.
10
Yeah,
waves.
it's 10 waves, and it's not as customizable, and it doesn't have changing points. So there, you lose a point, you go back. Very similar to the Overrun.
Yeah, it's like they basically took beast mode or horde mode, chopped it in half between survival and Overrun, and then just kind of dumbed down the two halves that they split off. It's miserable.
It also stripped down the competitive multiplayer game options. They don't like VIP game types or anything, King of the Hill game types anymore. They've got a free-for-all, 3-point domination game and team deathmatch now, and that's about it. Right over 4 maps.
Yeah, you'll be getting a lot of playtime out of that. Hope you bought your season pass.
Another aspect I'd like to note is the microtransactions in that game are pretty ridiculous. Some of the gun skins and like armor skins are like up to $5, which is pretty stupid for one armor skin.
Yeah, for 10 minutes of work from an artist, that's just absurd, exploitive even.
But you look cool.
Yeah, that's fine. Make it like $1. I just think $5 is kind of like,
that's okay. You could always get a big discount if you buy all of them together for the measly price of $50.
Is it $50 for all the skins?
Yeah, it's like 4,000 Microsoft points. It's ridiculous.
So I could buy the game pretty much again, or get all the skins.
Or buy a better game. How about just buy a better game, please?
Yeah. So we'll kind of recap everything we said, and kind of we'll state our individual opinions on the game. Overall, the story mode, for me, the initial story, the Judgment storyline, was terribly paced, repetitive, boring. The only strengths in it were because of the fact that it was a Gears game. The Aftermath campaign was a little bit better. The multiplayer is a shell of what it used to be in Gears of War 3, and they've removed most of the good features of Gears. And the game has stupid microtransactions, which aren't too big of a deal and don't reflect my score very much, but that is annoying. Overall, it's the worst Gears game for me by a pretty decent amount. I've never thought the series was amazing. I thought, all the games are pretty good and solid. I would give it a 5.8.
Yeah, I more or less agree with Josh. I agree that it's the worst Gears of War game to date. Like, I actually enjoyed the other Gears of War games. And for this one, the story was just uninteresting. The game was just really repetitive. It was just room after room. There was a lack of variety between the areas. Really had nothing going for it. Multiplayer wasn't as good as the other games. I mean, it just felt like a DLC pack that should have been, released for Gears of War 3, and they tried to get a full $60 out of you. Overall, I mean, its strengths are the fact that, it is a Gears game. It has some of the, it has like the same enemies as a Gears game, same weapons, the perfect active reload system for the campaign. But aside from that, I mean, if you're a big fan of the Gears of War franchise and you want to play another Gears game, you should get it. Aside from that, I would avoid the game, and I'd give it just a solid 6 out of 10.
Well, I agree with you guys and pretty much everything. I mean, it's a pretty game at times, but the way it's designed, it kind of just never reaches its peak. Certain times where you like go through a level in like 2 minutes, just breaks the flow of the game. I didn't like that. Yeah, it's just dumbed down for what Gears of War 3 was. I'm very disappointed. I would give it like a 6.2.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every Gears of War game has basically added new elements to the core game in order to kind of move Gears forward. And Gears of War Judgment basically is a massive regression of all those features that have been added to the Gears of War franchise over the years. And it's not good. To be honest, the Gears of War universe isn't really deep enough to sustain another story, and I think that's why we have this kind of tacked on Horde mode campaign. Aftermath does a little bit better by having a more conventional Gears of War kind of campaign style, but it ultimately becomes kind of boring and repetitive. The multiplayer massively stripped down and not terribly engaging. It just blows my mind that we used to have games like Unreal Tournament, which would launch with 50 maps, and then the mod community would add more, and now we have a game that comes out for a full $60 that has basically 4 maps for each mode. That's just insane. It's just awful. So yeah, I mean, Gears of War, I'll echo Josh. I think it's worth about a 5.8. Core Gears of War gameplay is still there, but everything else is just crumbling around it.
Alright, so that's our review discussion of Gears of War Judgment. If you liked it, or if you have any comments, or if you like the game and you want to defend it, please do so in the comment section. I'd like to see people point out what makes this game better than Gears of War 3 or its predecessors. And speaking of its predecessors, we're going to be giving away 4 free copies of the original Gears of War game to those that comment at random. We'll just take whoever comments at the end of it and put your name into a bucket and draw it. We'll send you codes for the original Gears game. So thanks for watching.
The accused are denied any right to an attorney and may not question the authority of this tribunal.
So we can't ask why you're doing this now.
At the conclusion of this tribunal, I will issue a fair and swift verdict.
Right, of course you will.